Sometimes a bit of waiting yields the best results. After about a month without getting trackside, it's March 15th and we're heading northbound past Ocala on I-75, making a beeline for Cordele, Georgia. Hello again, rail fans, and welcome back to another Georgia Railfan adventure. It's Spring Break 2022 and we've planned to spend a few days in Cordele to celebrate my 15th birthday. Pulling into the fairly new railroad park, a headlight and a horn greets us. This would be the trend for the next 3 days, train after train, rolling over diamonds. Barreling southbound through downtown is Q20314, Louisville, Kentucky to Baldwin, Florida loaded auto racks, with a fresh YN3 CM44 AC leader. 203 would begin the parade of mid-morning trains over the diamonds. NS-229 would be our first glimpse of NS action here, this being a high-priority Chicago to Jacksonville intermodal. From this low shot, you can see what makes Cordele such a busy place. 3 railroads converge, creating a system of railroad diamonds. The north to south double track is the Norfolk Southern's Macon to Valdosta GS&F main line in Cordele siding, which crosses the Heart of Georgia short line, which are both finally crossed by the CSX's busy Fitzgerald subdivision, running north out of Waycross and ending up in Atlanta. We'd end up seeing a majority of CSX trains on this trip, as NS would be completing their winter track maintenance in the time that we were here. With little time to reset up, we found I-142 lined up to cross the diamond next. This Jacksonville to Louisville, Kentucky intermodal would glide over the diamonds to clear up for the awaiting Heart of Georgia eastbound move. With CSX over the diamond, the JD dispatcher lined up the hog to cross. With freshly painted 3552 in the lead, the eastbound move would be dropping off cars from local customers and interchanging with CSX in downtown. The fresh hog logo over the parent company, Genesee & Wyoming's paint scheme, was definitely a treat to see. 2 more hog locomotives will be pushing on the end, as on westbound runs these engines lead and the 3552 pushes. This eliminates the need for a runaround track every few customers and shortens operation times. In almost every direction you look, there's maintenance of way equipment. Machines that replace ties, bolts, spikes, and even rails are lined up on storage tracks or in sidings. The railroad is friendly in the sense that in the summer they work on northern lines and in the winter they work on southern lines. Better weather for the workers. The 7th Street crossing was being fixed as it's lately been prone to malfunctioning. 7th Street is one of the busier road crossings in this quiet town. It's also easy to work on as about 500 feet from the crossing is CSX's yard office where crews get their paperwork and go on duty in the Cordele area. A 180-degree pan to the west reveals the perfect placement for the rail park. Right at the Diamonds, the city of Cordele has constructed a beautiful complex for rail fans. A working scanner, benches, drinkable water faucets, and some of the cleanest bathrooms all reside here to create a perfect spot to sit and watch the trains. It's also gaining popularity from the presence of a virtual rail fan camera that provides a live stream on YouTube that catches every single train movement over these diamonds, 24/7, 365. Next over the diamond is Q541. This is one of CSX's multi-day runs that works almost as a shuttle, picking up cars at local yards between massive hubs. In this situation, Q541 is running southbound from Cincinnati, Ohio to Waycross, Georgia, working Knoxville, Etowah, Cartersville, and Atlanta, all on its way south. By the time he passed us here in Cordele, 541 was over 12,000 feet long, with one GE locomotive in the lead and one acting as a mid-train distributed power unit, or DPU. Just after the DP unit, I noticed a handful of sporadic 5 to 10 car blocks of empty Tropicana juice cars. I'm guessing Q542, the northbound version of this train, takes these cars out of Tampa's Q442's consistent Waycross and in the course of a few days ends up in Cincy. It would make sense if this were the case, but it's just a hypothesis.
Oh, 25 there, Mr. DMH, 8895.
Running on approaches, 6 minutes pass, and IO-2514 slowly creeps across. With what railroad employees call a right blinker, a hard-working CSX 889 notches up to get his train over the hill. 889 would have his left ditch light out, which doesn't affect the locomotive's operations, but still looks pretty odd. And there goes 13,000 feet of Chicago to Jacksonville intermodal service. That Jeep locomotive in the downtown sidetrack is A730, and he'd be waiting to get permission from this train to Ross Siding just north of the Diamonds. There he'd drop off cars from the Hogs interchange that had just concluded on a sidetrack. First he'd have to get permission from a track inspector up the line, and then get a signal from the dispatcher.
Right, Mr. Atkinson, this A730 was engine 6431. I understand we got permission to your work limits. 694.0, 694.7, maximum speed on all tracks, over. Pick out 1402, over. 1402, thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Thank you, Atkinson.
Oh, let's see, there we go, is that better? Yeah, here we go, thing out. Yeah, I think it's hanging up a little, I don't know what it is. Alright, come on, let's go, let's get to Ross. Here we go, thing out.
With A730 and Ross, Norfolk Southern would end their 3-hour lull with train 175. NS 175 is a southbound manifest from DeButt's Yard in Chattanooga, Tennessee to the FEC in Jacksonville, where NS will interchange to them across the St. Johns River in Bowdoin Yard. This train would also display an array of GE and EMD motive power. .175 would have a special cut of maintenance of way equipment just after the loaded rock hoppers. What looks to be some kind of ballast conveyor unloader machine was leading a string of 7 yellow ballast cars. Very cool to see. A730-15 got an approach light Cordele holdout, was what we heard 10 minutes after 175's crossing. 730 would be tying down for the day on the Hog interchange track, with another local, A771, right behind him. Unfortunately, this is where the fun would begin.
CSX dispatcher A77114, CSX G741, over.
A77114, over.
Yeah, it's equipment out there. They're north, though, headed north. They're by the diamond, but it's left me a track light on their side. I guess it's still shunting, so I got the signal. They said you can go ahead and run time, over.
I understand permission to run time. Thank you, man.
All right, you're welcome. CSX JDO.
CSX 6771.
After sitting on the signal circuit for about 10 minutes, A771 timed out the NS signal and got an approach aspect on his side. This is what's called running time in railroad vernacular. Norfolk Southern had a southbound green as a track inspector had tripped the signal circuit a couple of miles up the line, automatically putting the CSX signals all to red. When A771 rounded the corner, he had a stop indication, when at least a yellow approach was expected. So after 10 minutes of tripping the CSX signal circuit, the NS signal timed out. Some hardware programming in the single bungalow sensed that a CSX train was ready to cross and that an NS train was still not through the diamond. So with a short delay, this so-called local, with 3 6-axle GE motors and 102 loaded rock cars, got a signal to cross the diamond and proceed southbound. Three 4,400 horsepower GE locomotives would be working their tails off to get this 26 covered hopper and 102 rock hopper loaded train uphill into and through downtown Cordele. No camera could have stayed steady as this train crossed. Each 270,000-pound car falling and rising out of all 3 diamond joints shook the entire town. A good 30 minutes would pass before our next train. Once again, another southbound, this one being I-143-12, although the dispatcher obviously being a little cloudy on the recent changes in CSX's train symbols, calling it Q-143.
XJD dispatch Jackson Ranch Tower.
I-143-12, Miss me.
I-143-12, over.
Yes, ma'am, we're running time on it right now, but we're not getting a signal, so we'll see if I get permission to pass the signal.
Alrighty, Q-143-12 after stopping there at the Cordele holdout. Permission by the stop signal Cordele holdout, main to main, south direction. No switch involved. I do not control the intersecting line there, over.
Alright, I-143-12 understands after stopping at the NS crossing Cordele, got permission to pass the stop signal. Cordele holdout, moving main to main, no switch involved. You do not have control of the intersecting line.
That's right, south direction 1627, 1627 AHW.
1627 AHW, thank you.
I appreciate it. CSXJD dispatcher.
The same situation had occurred as with A771. NS workers were tripping the signal, making CSX's signals red. But knowing that I-143 is a priority intermodal train, the dispatcher doesn't waste their precious time timing out the NS signal, and instead checks that no NS movements are near and talks I-143 past the red signal. After one last check of the NS line, the conductor climbs aboard and I-143 is once again on the move, destined for Jacksonville.
Got a clear signal. Cordele interlock. And 3474 southbound.
It's by far one of the most impressive aspects of the railroad to see one train implement all of its 13,000 combined horsepower struggle to get started up a hill compared to two locomotives gliding through town with 12,000 feet of intermodal containers behind them. Before long, the CSX signals would be forced to go red as Norfolk Southern showed its face again, this time displaying some foreign power. Unfortunately, I was never able to get a train ID for this guy, but I do know that it terminated in Valdosta with lots of southbound rock and ballast cars. The chance of more NS action was made good when NS 221 glided southbound over the interlocking. Nothing terribly special on this guy, just southbound mixed commerce from Atlanta to Jacksonville. Once 221 was clear, a green signal greeted us on the CSX's northbound holdout masts. These signals go from red to whatever other aspect once a train approaches Cordele. That's either once it passes north end Hatley or south end Cordele. Either way, I'm not fully sure, but I do know that a green means the train is coming, and quickly. From afar, the horn sounded like a 1990s era K5LA, like one you'd hear on an AC-44 or Dash 8, but as the train rounded the corner, the horn echoed around downtown as an unmistakable EMD leader. Q542 would be one of the nicest catches of the trip, with two of CSX's new rebuilt SD70 Maces, both in fresh YN3W scheme. With a wave and a horn salute, Q542 crosses the diamond. The paint scheme on the leader and the mid-train DP unit is called many things, like YN3C, YN3W, or just YN3 website. The gist of it all is that it's a yellow-nosed 3 painted engine without the B, as there's no boxcar outline anymore, and right under the CSX logo is their website, www.csx.com. Now, I believe that Canadian National was the first Class 1 railroad to implement this idea onto their locomotives, with CSX jumping aboard years later. After about a half-hour wait, Q542 would begin the evening rush over the diamonds. 16 minutes pass and Q601 gets a northbound green to continue his journey from Rice Yard in Waycross to Gentilly Yard in New Orleans. 3 big GE locomotives would be powering this 2-mile-long string of mixed commodities. He'd be meeting our train of the day in the siding at Ross. Seven minutes after Q601's tail end cleared, I-14312 got a signal over the diamond with a very nice array of GE power from the past 30 years. Some old, some new, and some right in between. CW44-8, number 7793, would lead this train from Kentucky to Florida with yet another YN3W painted locomotive, number 37 being an AC-44 in trail. About 5 minutes passed and I decided to go and check the NS signals, as I knew a train was approaching, but not knowing how close he was. The green signal on the main was a welcome sight, as I knew a northbound was close. But as the horn of an SD70 Ace broke the tranquility of this cloudy evening, I noticed the NS signal had gone red. With a blast of a GE horn on the CSX, no explanation here was needed. This is NS 214, a very late 214. That train crossing down there is Q60214, a northbound train from New Orleans to Waycross that at the moment is running south. Once again, the NS's signal had timed out, but once 602 was clear, this crew took seconds to rev up and get on the move again. With fading light and rain approaching, we called it a day, but we'd be up before the dawn the next morning for some more great South Georgia railfanning. We'd start our day with a hearty breakfast and a check of the signals to find the hog line to cross. At 7:30 in the morning, this little Jeep 38's horn shattered all the peaceful quiet from the night before. But we didn't have a problem with it, as the misty skies and bright orange locomotives created a nice break from the ubiquitous CSX traffic. It's March 16th and the second day of our trip. Today would be very hit or miss, with rushes of 5 or 6 consecutive trains and then lulls that lasted hours. The morning, however, would be a hit. Just minutes after the hog crossed, Norfolk Southern was lined. An on-time NS 214 this time was rolling through town towards us with more Union Pacific power. I guess there's a good amount of UP power in Atlanta right now, as NS would display the foreign power show much better than CSX. 214 is a daily Jax to Atlanta intermodal, departing Jacksonville in the early morning hours and usually stopping in Macon, Georgia for a crew change on its way north. Waiting on NS would be a southbound CSX train, what new? But once again, the Cordele holdout signal would be having troubles, so a CSX repairman would manually set the signal and reset it. After this, no more problems would occur, which made the dispatchers and the crew's jobs much easier. G42708 would be our train approaching with 124 loaded grain cars destined for Baldwin, Florida, about 20 miles west of Jacksonville. Waiting in the siding at Cordele would be Q64815, way across the Chicago merchandise. For such a big train, it got started pretty quickly, notching up and crossing the diamonds in minutes. An end-train DPU would be present on this train, which is less common than mid-train DPUs. Q646 would be coming through Cordele after about a half hour of waiting. For the first time of the trip, the sun came out, creating a haven of 60-degree weather with a soft breeze. Perfect rail fanning weather. Trailing mid-train on Q646 was an unusual cut of Canadian National tank cars. At one point, this cut was a sharp white and red streak of tanks used for delivering refined fuel from a mine near Chicago to a generating plant in Ontario. From what I know, the plant now takes normal black tank cars, like the ones you can see on almost any freight train now. Presently, this 17-car set is completely rusted over and doesn't look to be in use. Back in the 80s, this was Canadian National's tank train, but now they seem to be near the end of their operational lives. About 5 minutes pass and the Hog makes an appearance, shoving back over the diamond to interchange with CSX local A730 just east of downtown. Lumber mills are copious around Cordele, making perfect sense of these log cars full of freshly cut telephone poles. This was nice to see, as down in Florida, these cars are very hard to find. The Hog was ready to begin operations with A730, but one thing was missing: A730. He was switching in Ross and ready to come back east to Cordele to commence interchange operations. The issue was there was another northbound that had already passed Hatley, so 730 was forced to wait on its passing in Ross.
I got permission in your work order. Maximum speed limit of my train milepost AMB 695.2 to the AMB 696.4 all tracks. So
1157, Mr. Jackson.
1157. Thank you, Mr. Lambo.
Yeah, man, appreciate y'all.
A770 would be that northbound, the empty counterpart of yesterday's A771. Today he'd be taking empty rock hoppers north from Waycross to Brown Sand, which is a massive rock mine just south of Junction City. 770 would have 3 rebuilds leading, with 2 once again being in CSX's sharp YN3 paint scheme. An EMD would also make it into the mix, flanked by the CM44s. After wanting to see just one of these YN3 locomotives for the past couple months, the wait for Cordele was paying off. Once A770 was cleared, A730 would get a signal at Ross to head back south into town. It was close to noon by the time 7:30 had passed, meaning it was lunchtime. We ordered online and made the quick pickup from Railhouse Tavern about a block away from the platform. A shrimp po' boy sandwich and lemon pepper chicken with flavorful sides was a great way to satisfy our hunger. Delicious food, wonderful weather, and busy rail action. I mean, it does not get better than that. After picking up the Hog's cars, A730 would go back to Ross to drop them off for another local to pick up. With confirmation that 730 was in the siding, the dispatcher lined I-142 to meet I-025 in the Cordele siding, and in about 10 minutes, southbound I-025 was rolling through. I-142 would be next across, with a very nice consist. A YN2 AC-44 was to lead the train north, with CSX 3440 trailing. 3440 is equipped with the L&N Spirit of Ravenna cab sticker. Although it's small and honestly irrelevant, it was still a little noticeable touch to this train. Minutes after I-142 cleared, A730 would come back south light engine to start work with the heart of Georgia. A good 25 minutes would pass before a distant horn and headlight would surprise us. We didn't hear this train until he was right on top of the diamonds. Usually we'd start hearing a train calling signals at Ross or even more north, but this crew was either very quiet or the scanner never picked them up. Nevertheless, the southbound would be Q54110. Another YN3 rebuild would be trailing in the consist with a faded ES40 DC leading. A730 would have the diamond to use as extra switching room for the next hour. He'd be dropping off cars for the hog while they would be shoving cars for Ross in the transfer track. After a good 4 moves over the diamond, A730 was off for his final journey to Ross. With 730 and Ross, Norfolk Southern would get the interlocking for a southbound. For some reason, track work, poor maintenance of wave planning, and engine troubles backed up NS for the entire day. In the whole day that we were here, we'd only see 3 NS movements, the median of said trains being NS 151. Daily mixed freight from Macon's Brosnan Yard to Langdale Yard in Valdosta. After 151 cleared, I walked downtown as the streets were quiet and tranquil on this cool, early March afternoon. Between 6th and 5th Street, the heart of Georgia stores their 2 everyday locomotives. These 2 have been coupled back to back for a while now, as no matter what direction the train is traveling, the crew will always have the cab forward. The hushed locomotive sitting undisturbed in the chilly breeze was a perfect foreground for our next train. A few yards west of the engines is the small but well-maintained Sam Shortline Cordele Passenger Depot. Here, passengers aboard the Sam can load and disembark on the Friday and Saturday excursions through the forests, sawmills, and pleasant villages of South Georgia. The tranquility of the 45-minute hiatus was broken by the horn of another southbound CSX manifest. Led by CSX 3133, X606 was pounding northbound out of New Orleans and now drifting south towards Waycross. The X in the train symbol is replacing the normal Q, as this is an extra run of Q606, making for an unusual time for a 606 train to pass. Minutes later, A730 gets a signal to cross the diamond and tie down for the day. At 7th Avenue, the engineer slows to a walking speed to let the conductor down. The conductor then walked to his parked car, got in, and drove to the switches. I wouldn't say it's lazy, it's just being productive more efficiently. 6431 is parked into the transfer track, and once the derail is set back in place and switches lined for the main, 730's crew calls it a day and drives to the yard office. They turn in their papers, and after a few minutes, they drove home. Back to the diamond, we hear the dispatcher mention a train approaching Ross. It's yet another extra, this one being X60215. The special on this train would be CSX-9, number 9031. We knew he'd be trailing, but we were surprised to see another old Dash Series locomotive in the second position. The last of the inactive storm clouds would clear just as 602's DPU passed, making for some much needed sunlight over the last few cars. After 602, our second X606 of the day would light up the radio. A myriad of CSX locomotives would be leading this train, but not one alike. In the lead, an ES40DC, an AC44, and a rebuilt SD40-3. The reason that we only got X606s and not the normal Q606s is still unknown, but we do know that New Orleans is sending away across huge trains nowadays, this one being over 13,000 feet in length. With X606 by, we would hear another train in Ross, but not calling out signals, they'd be switching. A753 would be our train, a daily local from Oglethorpe to Fitzgerald, Georgia. Usually a night run, we knew a Jeep or SD40 locomotive would be leading this train, but after about 30 minutes, a headlight rounded the curve with some of the most crooked ditch lights I've ever seen. Any of these cars look familiar? Well, half of A753's train would be the Hogs cars that A730 had dropped off about 3 hours earlier. And about those ditch lights, they're temporary. This crew began the day by mounting these lights using clamps, knowing they'd be long-hood forward for the entirety of their trip. CSX 8051 is an ex-Seaboard SD40-2 built by EMD in July of 1979. The engine was cool to see, as I believe the faded yellow paint on the nose of the cab is original Yellow Nose 2 paint that for some reason CSX never fully repainted. Nevertheless, the slight hill in downtown would make this old soldier work, pulling its 40 mostly loaded cars southbound. It would be a solid hour before our next train would come. For some reason, the radio never clearly announced this train, which means no ID or idea on the whereabouts of this movement. It looked like a coal train at first, with 96 coal loads in the front of the train, but then 40 plus cars of freight dissolved that presumption. Norfolk Southern would come in the midst of sunset with an empty grain train heading northbound. 2 GEs and an SD70 Ace would lead this long string of NS hoppers under the symbol of 51A northbound. He'd be clearing just in time, as once the rear of his train was over the diamond, a green signal would greet us northbound on the CSX. By the twilight's last gleaming, I-26, northbound intermodal from Jacksonville to Chicago, Illinois, would glide over the diamonds. I-26's friendly crew would end our day out. At least, that's what we thought until another green on the NS and another northbound headlight would shine through the growing shadows of nightfall. Pulling off at 17th Avenue, NS 152 would roar north with barely enough light to still illuminate the train. A Waycross to New Orleans freight train would cut through the early morning fog of Thursday morning. It's about 7 a.m. on this cold and windy, foggy morning, and CSX is already lining traffic to cross the diamonds. This would be our last half day in Cordele, so all we could hope for was lots of good action before lunchtime. Another rebuilt CM44AC would be doing DP duties today for Q601. I've really become fond of these locomotives with their odd mix of modern GE cabs and rounded AC44 bodies. Minutes after 6:01, the northbound NS signal would shine green. NS 214's horn would echo through town, and in moments he was here, sporting more Union Pacific power. Two EMD SD70 Aces would be trailing behind the UP Givo, both looking like they could use a new paint job pretty soon. I enjoyed this 214 not only for its power, but also for the copious piggyback trailer traffic. UPS, Premier, and other carriers would make up the majority of this train, all heading north towards Atlanta. Waiting on 214 on the CSX was our good friend A730. At the moment he needed to use the diamond as extra switching room, but as soon as the whole train had been dropped for the hog, 730 headed north to Ross, with one loaded center beam for Griffin Lumber. With 730 gone, we moseyed over to the north end of Cordele siding where a green signal awaited us southbound. Our train in the siding would be northbound Q64817. That green would be for its southbound counterpart Q647. In minutes he'd be rumbling through downtown, and 10 minutes to 8 a.m. we were set up and ready when here he came. About a quarter mile down the road, the hog was beginning its morning work, preparing to depart westbound. Driving around, we heard the unfortunate news that track workers on NS had gained authority to begin work on the diamond with CSX for the next hour. So we headed for Ross, where we knew a train would be waiting, but on the way the hog got permission to cross, and soon enough he was here, with an ear-shattering horn and fresh load of freight. It would be another 45 minutes until the NS left the diamonds, and soon enough we started to hear approaching trains on the radio. Time was ticking. At this point we had about 2 hours left in Cordele, but just in time, the floodgates opened. Q261 would be our first hit, North Baltimore, Ohio to Baldwin, Florida loaded auto racks, working a myriad of yards between its two destinations. This train would clock the defect detector at milepost 690 at over 14,000 feet. Six minutes later, X602 crosses. Two GE motors would power this train out of New Orleans with another 12,000 feet of freight for Waycross. The parade continues as another 10 minutes pass and X649 rumbles through. Extra freight from Birmingham, Alabama to, you guessed it, Waycross, Georgia, with a nice Dash 8 locomotive trailer. "15 minutes later, Q203 calls out Cordele southbound. More automobiles heading south from Louisville to Baldwin. Remember that train waiting in Cordele siding since before 8 a.m.? Well, after the mid-morning parade of southbounds, Q648 finally gets a signal north. And he wasn't wasting any time after telling the dispatcher his crew time was beginning to shrink. Two old AC-44s would lead this train to Birmingham, finishing off the best 40 minutes I've ever railfanned, filming 5 trains. Sneaking north, I-126, Savannah to Memphis intermodal traffic passes us. He caught us by surprise, with little radio callouts and relatively low horn action. Unfortunately, it was about that time now, and we began to pack up our stuff and say goodbyes, when one last green signal would catch us. Q646 would be our last train on this amazing trip. This freight out of Waycross was led by two old ubiquitous ES40 DCs, but two good old ES40 DCs. Well, that's it, and that's all. 3 amazing days in Cordele had finally been completed, but not before treating us with over 50 trains. Thanks to my dad and a couple other friends for helping plan this trip and keep us company in the beautiful March weather. But until we meet again, somewhere in Florida or in HO scale, this is Christian from Multicolor Films. End of transmission.